Music. Let me share a key insight that often escapes notice until well into grown-up life. Those hushed aspects of your being didn't emerge out of thin air. The reticence you hold inside, the flutter in your chest when a stranger initiates chat. That pause right before you open your mouth. None of it was accidental. It was acquired, forged, and refined subtly by those who brought you up, usually without any intent on their part. You see, no one turns inward without influences. It's not merely an innate characteristic, it's also an echo, a reflection of the relational climate you navigated as a kid. And if your early years brimmed with tempests of critique, disapproval, or silent pressures, it's no wonder you gravitated toward quiet as a refuge. Let's trace it back to the start. Picture a young kid, unreserved, animated, inquisitive. They voice thoughts without filter. They chuckle with abandon. They approach life as an adventure ripe for discovery. But then, at the family meal, they blurt something out and the room erupts in laughter, not alongside them, but aimed at them. Perhaps a guardian quips, "Why, quote, sporu." Music. Perhaps a guardian quips, "Why, quote, I'm one." Yet to that youngster, it sows a kernel. Voicing thoughts invites risk. Sharing invites dismissal. Thus, they adapt. They grow cautious. They weigh every phrase. They observe more than participate. That's the origin, not a deliberate decision, but a tactic for endurance. After all, for kids, fitting in trumps personal disclosure every time. Experts in psychology term this responsive restraint. It signifies that in an unsafe emotional setting, your mind trains itself to restrain, to stifle rather than reveal. It's like donning protective gear for feelings, and it serves its purpose. Fewer rebukes come your way. Clashes get sidestepped. You blend into the background, but gradually, that gear fuses with who you are. If your folks kept cutting you off mid-sentence, you absorbed the lesson that your input didn't matter. If they stacked you against bolder, surer peers, you internalized that reserve was a defect. Music. And if they clamped down on your sentiments, urging you to halt tears or toughen up, you grasped that your private thoughts weren't secure to unveil. So you pulled back into yourself. You crafted an inner sanctuary where pondering, imagining, and sensing could happen without peril. And decades on, you might label it as being reserved. But at its core, it's different. It's a shield for the self that's been mistaken for temperament. Now, consider the mental mechanics behind this. A kid's stress response system evolves based on caregivers' relational rhythms. If your guardians were jittery, erratic, or aloof in feelings, your physiology tuned into threats, even the faint ones. Perhaps your dad's hush before eating signaled brewing ire. Perhaps your mom's exhale foretold another letdown. Eventually, your psyche turned razor-sharp to relational signals, interpreting pitch, vibe, and demeanor well before words flew. That's not mere timidity, that's alertness. And alertness breeds reserve. It's draining to perpetually forecast relational storms. So the mind resorts to withdrawal as the fix for that tension. It pursues calm via isolation. It draws solace from the known. That's the root of why many reserved folks insist on solo time to regroup. It's beyond just enjoying seclusion. It's that seclusion alone lets your stress system unwind at last. But the real revelation runs deeper. That fatigue stems from prolonged efforts to secure emotional footing in arenas that never really offered it. Music. Allow me to illustrate. Suppose you were an attuned youngster, the type who picked up on tiny nuances, who absorbed others' distress profoundly. But at home, that attunement got branded as frailty. You might have caught phrases like, quote, too. Gradually, that narrative reshaped your thinking. Each intense emotion triggered self-doubt. Quote, thuri. Hence, you buried it. Jump ahead 2 decades. You're in a discussion where a voice edges up a notch and your frame locks up instantly. No debate, no outpouring. You simply stiffen or retreat. That's beyond disposition. That's imprinting. You were subtly and steadily schooled to diminish yourself. And curiously, your guardians likely never aimed for that. They were probably echoing cycles from their own upbringing. Perhaps your dad was taught that sentiment signaled frailty. Perhaps your mom had to mute her own thoughts to cope in her household. Inherited quietude handed over like a legacy. Viewed through that lens, reserve isn't a blemish to mend. It's a narrative to unpack. But let's delve further, since the way self-concept emerges here is truly intriguing. The mind constructs what specialists dub bonding frameworks. These are instinctive outlines dictating how we anticipate connections to unfold. If your upbringing involved guardians who were emotionally unpredictable, affection one moment, emotional withdrawal the next, that's the kind of upbringing that wired your mind to associate bonds with uncertainty. Romance starts to seem unreliable. As a grown-up, you steer clear of intense attachments, subconsciously bracing for them to evaporate. What might seem like self-reliance could actually be poise, or even insight. Yet at times, it's merely anxiety cloaked in serenity. Folks might praise you as, "will quote for you," or note your serene reflective nature. They intend it kindly, and partly it's true. Your insight, compassion, and perceptiveness, these are profound strengths, forged in the dim corners of times when you felt overlooked. Such is the irony of being inward-focused. It's a scar turned into savvy. Now, consider how this unfolds in social settings. Those who lean introverted frequently report exhaustion after mingling. They assume it's a flaw in their people skills. In reality, they're usually exceptional at navigating others. They're always scanning subtle facial cues, vocal inflections, implied messages. They're performing real-time emotional assessments amid every exchange. Far from clumsy, that's acute relational acuity, though it wears you down. To protect yourself, you mastered decoding the vibes, desires, and feelings of those nearby, adapting on the fly. You turned into a pro at tuning emotional frequencies. It shielded you, sure, but it bred constant scrutiny of yourself. Each utterance turns into a deliberate choice. Each pause carries weight. That's why alone time brings relief, not from disliking company, but from pausing the endless scrutiny. Ever puzzled over your passion for profound dialogues versus your dread of chit-chat? It stems from a hunger for genuineness. Back then, superficial exchanges often rang hollow or hazardous. You honed the art of sensing the unsaid. These days, superficiality just saps your energy. But there's real grace in this dynamic. What began as hurt evolves into a perspective that prizes substance, since you've grown adept at dwelling in your thoughts. You spot details that slip past most. A quiver in a tone, the weight of quiet, the subtle beauty in everyday scenes. Your folks might have muted your voice without meaning to, yet that very act honed your internal landscape. You emerged as a watcher, a ponderer, a pursuer of essence amid the clamor. Of course, there's a downside. While withdrawal restores, seclusion can toughen. Plenty of inward types harbor a hidden longing, yearning for meaningful ties, yet dreading a replay of early hurts. Thus, they hold back until someone else initiates. They dip a toe in before baring their soul. They cherish profoundly but subtly, haunted by the worry that vulnerability could shatter their hard-won security. And that leads to a tough truth. Your family didn't merely influence your self-image. They molded your take on relationships. If affection once hinged on compliance, achievements, or restraint, then today, it might still demand proof through restraint, tranquility, or minimal demands. That conviction lingers. It masquerades as generosity or the notion, quote, pay 5. Deep down, though, it's the old hurt resurfacing. I'm more lovable when I shrink myself. Still, you've always merited room to breathe. Grasping that shifts your world. You see that inwardness isn't the issue. The narrative fueling it is. You can stay subdued without dread. Embrace seclusion without it as a barrier. Reflect deeply without fading away. It begins by dismantling the myth that restraint signals frailty or seclusion means detachment. Often, the most subdued souls harbor the most vibrant minds. They've simply lacked a secure outlet to express them. Perhaps it's time to craft that haven within. Reflect on the years you've shouldered that reserve, not merely as routine, but as your core self. It defined your presence. You assured yourself, social scenes aren't my thing. You persuaded your mind that hush is preferable. Yet at times, that hush isn't tranquility, it's a guard. Truth be told, serenity differs from detachment. Opting for aloneness isn't the same as being trained to dread bustle. In childhood, terms like limits or relational oversight escape you. You just sense the atmosphere, you detect strain in the air, you register when warmth pulls back. So you devise unseen tactics, tone it down, go along, fade into the background, you endure. But those coping mechanisms don't vanish with age, they morph into ingrained habits. You view yourself as subdued when it's actually scripted, as guarded when it's safeguarding something tender. Yet here's the remarkable part. We're not set in stone. The mind continually reshapes via what experts term neuroplasticity. That allows the very same psyche to a mind accustomed to contracting can equally adapt to broadening. You can reshape your perception of security not by compelling yourself to shout, but by guiding your nervous system to recognize that voicing thoughts no longer spells peril. This begins in subtle instances, voicing your ideas without prior scripting, allowing others to cut in without recoiling, uttering words despite a quivering tone. Each such instance imprints a fresh lesson in your body. The universe didn't collapse when I expressed myself. Recovering from such ingrained patterns doesn't involve morphing into an outgoing personality. It's about restoring your entitlement to fully inhabit your being, even in stillness. It's understanding that your reticence holds strength, yet it mustn't confine you. Consider it from a fresh viewpoint. Picture your early home as a stage production. Certain children thrived under the glare of attention. They were urged to act, to verbalize, to radiate. You and others like you lingered behind the scenes, scrutinizing, empathizing, grasping the mechanics of the drama. This fostered depth, sensitivity, perceptiveness, but it also bred reluctance to claim the spotlight. You mastered every signal, every beat, every pause, yet you overlooked something vital. The narrative stalls without your participation. Now, as an adult, you may sense existence unfolding beside you, excluding you. You linger for an invitation, you await comprehension, but few discern the richness concealed by one who masterfully conceals it. Thus, recovery initiates with a straightforward yet transformative step, revealing yourself, declaring aloud, perhaps just to your reflection. Quote 7. Naming it strips away its invisibility. Once exposed, you gain the power to opt for change. You may also spot an additional pattern. Reserved natures frequently pair with an insistence on flawlessness. This isn't random. When caregivers tied affection to achievements, to stellar marks, polished etiquette, impeccable conduct, your psyche linked approval to impeccability. Consequently, you approached all aspects cautiously, your phrasing, your feelings, your persona. You sifted every notion prior to articulation. You aimed for seamlessness, as errors once invited reprimand or rejection. Yet, perfection's toll is genuineness. You vocalize solely when convinced of accuracy. You divulge only when assured of acceptance. And so the loop of muteness persists well beyond youth. Nevertheless, consider this irony. Folks don't bond over flawlessness. Bonds form amid vulnerabilities. Via the waver in your delivery, via admissions of fear, via modest revelations that whisper, "I'm merely mortal, like you." Perhaps that's the essence you've guarded throughout. Not timidity, but your very humanness. Being reserved doesn't equate to disliking others. It typically signals a yearning for bonds so profound, so pure, that superficial exchanges seem hollow by contrast. You've never shunned society. You've hungered for substance, attentiveness, security, honesty. That's precisely why genuine hearing from another can thaw something within you. That's why extended midnight dialogues act as balm. They evoke what's been absent, an arena where quiet draws no scorn and utterances serve no harm. And perhaps that's the core need of your younger days, not more boisterous guardians, but more secure ones. Not excess chatter, but deeper attentiveness. It's peculiar how we absorb relational dialects we didn't select. If your elders conversed via critique, you internalized exchange through insecurity. If via hush, you stuffed that hush with endless rumination. And if via dominance, you pursued liberty via seclusion. But mending resembles acquiring a novel tongue, one permitting no regrets for simply being. You commence with affirmations like, quote 9. Gradually, the barriers erected for defense morph into portals, enduring yet ajar. You start viewing your parents not as adversaries, but as reflections. They too were once young, molded by restraint. They too deemed feelings hazardous. Grasping this halts the legacy. It silences the reverberation, for lineage-based recovery doesn't launch with clashes. It launches with mercy, for them, for you. You come to perceive your reserve not as frailty. It's a refined manifestation of compassion. You excel at hearing because you once desperately sought a listener. You master solace because you once ached for it. But resist letting that compassion diminish you. Harness it, articulate through it, pen through it, craft through it. For society craves not merely vocal individuals, it craves authentic ones. And perhaps your reserved nature was always grooming you for this. Not solitude, but discernment. Not withdrawal, but contemplation. You perceive reality uniquely. You experience profoundly. That's no affliction. That's awakening. Even so, certain days will bring inner voices urging restraint. Don't intrude. And on those occasions, you must recall that inner voice. It's merely a shadow, not the reality. A subtle shift occurs when you cease equating quietness with security. Once you begin voicing your thoughts genuinely, rather than performing for approval, you transform the atmosphere around you, not through volume, but through sincerity. And here's the twist. The very vulnerability that once prompted you to retreat now enables profound connections with others that few experience. That's the complete arc of recovery, converting protective muteness into purposeful calm. You stop retreating from anxiety and instead embrace tranquility, recognizing that true serenity thrives in the absence of clamor. You no longer evade interactions, but selectively engage with those vibes worth your time. You cease diminishing yourself for affection and instead grow mindfully, grounded in self-compassion. When you view your introspective nature not as a flaw, but as a narrative shaped by years of emotional resilience, you uncover another truth. You're in control of the pen now. You hold the power to revise the tale. Quiet yet bold, contemplative yet articulate, soft yet strong. That's within your reach. It was never about altering your essence. It's about reclaiming the self that existed prior to fear reshaping your character. Deep under all that caution and restraint lies the same youthful spirit, eager, receptive, creative, simply awaiting your nod to emerge once more. Adulthood's gift is this: you can grant yourself that approval. You can embody the nurturing guardian you once craved, compassionate, empathetic, supportive. Perhaps your upbringing forged your reserved side, but today you define its significance. It could signify isolation, or it could represent insight. It might suggest dread of sharing or command over introspection. The decision rests with you, for recovery isn't about amplifying your voice. It's about liberating your spirit. And in that liberation, when you express without dread, connect without barriers, and recharge without remorse, your subtlety evolves into strength. Not the sort that seeks spotlight, but the kind that commands respect via authenticity. True harmony isn't silence devoid of sound. It's the assurance that even in quiet, your essence holds weight.